My hands did not shake as I read their disownment letter at the five-star restaurant. My sister's phone recorded my expected breakdown. My parents watched with satisfied eyes. Then I reached for my own envelope. They wanted my breakdown. They got a hostile takeover. My name is Audrey Kensington, and at 33 years old, I never expected my net worth to be the reason my family hated me. Most people think being disowned is a tragedy. For me, it was a business transaction. Before I tell you how I turned a $15 million debt into the ultimate revenge, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to be the villain in someone else's story just to survive. The crystal chandelier above table 4 at Le Monde shimmered perfectly. It was the kind of light that made diamonds sparkle and flaws disappear. But nothing could hide the ugly smirk on my sister Brittany's face. She adjusted her phone, propping it against the floral centerpiece. I knew that angle. She was live streaming to her close friends list again. The waiter poured a vintage Cabernet into my father Richard's glass. It was $500 a bottle. When the waiter reached me, my mother Patricia covered my glass with her manicured hand. "No," she said sharply. "Just tap water for her. She cannot afford the share of the wine bill, and we are certainly not covering it." Brittany giggled and leaned into her phone camera, whispering, "Guys, you will not believe this. My big sister is wearing that same suit from 3 years ago. So tragic." She turned back to me with fake sympathy. "Audrey, maybe you should try selling those little condos downtown instead of pretending to be a real estate mogul. Mom says you haven't not sold a house in 6 months. It is embarrassing for us, really." I said nothing. I just folded my hands on the white tablecloth. I did not correct them. I did not tell them that I was not a real estate agent. I did not tell them that in the financial district they called me the vulture because I swooped in to liquidate failing companies. That silence seemed to annoy my father. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. He did not hand it to me. He tossed it. It slid across the table, knocking over the salt shaker and landing right in front of my plate of unfinished bread. "Open it," Richard commanded. His voice was loud enough that the couple at the next table turned to look. I slid my finger under the seal. I did not need to read the legal jargon to know what it was. Petition for estrangement. Removal from the family trust. I looked up. My mother was cutting her steak with aggressive precision. "We are doing this for your own good, Audrey," she said without looking at me. "You are a stain on the Kensington brand. We need to protect Brittany's future, and quite frankly, your failure is contagious. Sign it, now." Brittany held her phone closer, zooming in on my face, waiting for the tears. She wanted content. My father wanted control. My mother wanted perfection. I picked up the pen. The paper felt heavy in my hands. It was high-quality linen stock, the kind used for wedding invitations or death certificates. I cleared my throat and read Clause 4 out loud so the entire table could hear. The undersigned agrees to legally petition for a change of surname within 30 days. No public or private association with the Kensington brand is permitted. My father Richard swirled his $500 Cabernet. He did not even look at me. He simply said, "Do not flatter yourself, Audrey. We are just protecting our reputation. We cannot have a failed real estate agent dragging down the family name with bad credit and cheap suits." I ignored him and moved my finger down the page. Clause 6 was even better, complete forfeiture of all communication rights. But it was Clause 7 that made me pause. This was the trap. This was the reason for the expensive dinner. I read it slowly. The undersigned irrevocably waives all beneficiary rights, claims, and interests regarding the estate and trust of Theodore Kensington. I looked up. That trust fund was the only thing my grandfather had left behind. He had bypassed my parents, knowing they were reckless spenders, and left everything in a generation-skipping trust. My parents had been trying to get their hands on it for a decade. My mother, Patricia, leaned forward. Her diamond earrings caught the light as she narrowed her eyes. "Stop staring at it and sign, Audrey. You know why we are doing this. You have always been the black sheep, the mistake. Look at your sister." Brittany took her cue perfectly. She placed a manicured hand on her stomach and let out a small, staged sigh. Her husband Dion shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but remained silent. "Mom is right, Audrey," Brittany said, her voice trembling for the camera. "I have a baby to think about now, an heir. We cannot have you dragging us down with your drama and your financial instability. I need a stress-free environment for the baby. We need that trust fund to secure his future." Patricia reached out and patted Brittany's hand. "See, Audrey, this is about legacy. Brittany married a CFO. She is expanding the family line. She is bringing value to this world. You are 33 years old with no husband, no assets, and a career that is frankly embarrassing. You are a stain on this family." The words hung in the cold air of the restaurant. A stain. That is what my mother called her firstborn daughter. She thought my rented apartment was a sign of poverty. She did not know it was a strategic choice to stay mobile while I acquired distressed assets across the tri-state area. She thought I was broke because I did not wear logos. She did not realize that wealth whispers while debt screams, and my parents were screaming. My father checked his gold Rolex. "We do not have all night, Audrey. The notary is waiting in the lobby. Sign the waiver and you can leave. We will even validate your parking." I looked at the document one last time. They wanted me to sign away my rights to a trust fund they believed was filled with millions. They wanted to cut me off to hoard the wealth for their golden child. They had no idea what was actually in that trust. By forcing me to sign this, they were not taking my money. They were taking my liability. I uncapped the pen. The ink was black, permanent, just like the severance of this relationship. "I will sign," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But remember that you asked for this. You drafted the terms. You demanded total separation." Patricia smiled. It was a cold, victorious smile. "We know what we are doing, Audrey. Just sign the paper and disappear." So I did. I signed my name with a flourish. Audrey Kensington. For the very last time. Then I reached into my bag for the black envelope I had brought with me. The one that would turn their victory into a nightmare. The black envelope slid across the white damask tablecloth like a shark fin cutting through water. It stopped right against my father's wine glass, making a sharp clink sound. Richard looked at it with a sneer. He did not touch it immediately. Instead, he wiped his mouth with his napkin, looking at me with pure exhaustion. "What is this, Audrey?" he asked. "A last desperate plea for money, or maybe a bill for your student loans. We just told you. You are cut off. We are not paying a cent for you anymore." "Open it," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made my mother stop chewing. Richard rolled his eyes. He picked up the envelope and tore it open with a jagged rip, showing how little he respected whatever was inside. He pulled out a single document. It was bound in blue legal backing. The header was stamped with the official seal of the Federal Reserve Bank. He squinted at the first line. "Notice of debt assignment and transfer of lien." I watched the color drain from his face. It started at his cheeks and washed down to his neck, leaving him pale and gray. His hand began to tremble. The paper rattled in the silent restaurant. "This is impossible," he whispered. His arrogance was evaporating like mist. "Is it?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Did you think the bank would wait forever, Richard? You have defaulted on the Kensington Hotel mortgage for 6 months. You leveraged the property to 120% of its value to fund Brittany's lifestyle and your gambling debts. The bank classified your loan as a toxic asset on Monday morning." My mother leaned in, her eyes darting between Richard and the paper. "Richard, what is she talking about? What is that paper? Why do you look like that?" My father did not answer her. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life I saw fear in his eyes. Real primal fear. "Vulture Capital," he choked out. "The bank sold our debt to Vulture Capital." Brittany laughed nervously. She adjusted her phone camera, still live streaming. "So what, Dad? Who cares who owns the debt? We will just refinance like we always do. Why are you acting so weird? It is just business." "You cannot refinance when the new owner demands immediate liquidation," I said calmly. Vulture Capital specializes in acquiring distressed hospitality assets, stripping them of incompetent management and selling them for parts. They do not negotiate with failing owners, they evict them. How do you know this? Richard hissed, slamming his hand on the table. How did a low-level real estate agent get her hands on internal bank documents? Did you steal this? I will have you arrested for corporate espionage. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my interlocked fingers. It was the exact pose my father used to use to intimidate his employees. Now I was using it on him. You really never paid attention, did you? I said. You called me a scavenger. You called me a failure because I did not work at the family hotel. You laughed at my cheap suits. But on Wall Street, they do not call me Audrey. They call me the Vulture. I am the CEO and sole owner of Vulture Capital. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Brittany dropped her phone. It clattered onto the china plate, cracking the screen. Dion choked on his water. My mother simply froze, her mouth slightly open. I pointed to the paper in my father's hand. Congratulations, Richard. You successfully got rid of your daughter. You got exactly what you wanted. But unfortunately for you, I am now your creditor. And I am calling in the loan. The full $15 million. It is due immediately. Dion snatched the paper from Richard's shaking hand. He scanned the document, his eyes widening behind his wire-rimmed glasses. As the CFO of the family business, he knew exactly what a notice of assignment meant. But he was looking for something else. He was looking for the signature on the buy side. His finger stopped at the bottom of the page. Then he looked up at me. His face was pale. It is real, Richard, Dion whispered. The transfer is legally binding. The transaction date was this morning. And the authorizing signature for Vulture Capital. It is hers. Patricia slammed her fork down. The sound echoed through the silent restaurant. Do not be ridiculous, Dion. Audrey cannot even afford rent. She probably printed that off the internet to scare us. Audrey, stop this childish game right now. You are ruining Brittany's celebration. I took a sip of water. It tasted like victory. I am not playing games, Mother. While you were busy mocking my off-the-rack suits and assuming I was a struggling realtor, I was building a private equity firm. Do you know why they call my firm Vulture Capital? Because we circle dying companies. We wait for incompetent owners to bleed them dry. And then we swoop in and pick the bones clean. Richard stood up. His face turned a dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, causing the manager near the entrance to take a step forward. You little thief, Richard spat. That is how you did it. You used your access to the building to steal financial records. You committed fraud. You are trying to blackmail your own family. I will have you thrown in jail before you see a dime of that debt. You do not have $15 million. You never did. Who are you working for? Who is the real backer? I looked him dead in the eye. I am the backer, Richard. I am the board. I am the CEO. And right now, I am the only thing standing between you and federal prison for tax evasion. But please go ahead and call the police. I am sure they would love to see the secondary set of books Dion has been keeping for you. Brittany gasped and turned the camera away from the table, but she did not stop recording. The comment section on her live stream must have been exploding. Dion looked at me with a mix of fear and admiration. He knew I was not bluffing. He knew exactly how much cash flow the hotel was bleeding because he was the one trying to plug the holes. You cannot do this. Audrey, Dion said, his voice low. This is your family. If you call in this loan immediately, we will be bankrupt by Monday. The hotel is the only collateral we have. Correction, I said, standing up and smoothing out my blazer. The hotel was the only collateral you had. Now it belongs to me. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises or pay the full $15 million plus interest. Patricia let out a shrill laugh. It sounded bordering on hysterical. You are insane. We are not going anywhere. This is our legacy. You are just a jealous, bitter girl who wants what her sister has. I picked up my purse. I do not want what Brittany has, Mother. I do not want a husband who cooks the books or a reputation built on lies. I want my money. Or I want my property. I turned to the waiter who had been hovering nervously nearby, holding the check. "Put the wine on their tab," I said, pointing to my parents. "And make sure you run their card before they leave. It might be declined." I stood up and smoothed the lapels of my blazer. It was Italian wool tailored to perfection, but my parents were too blinded by rage to notice the quality. I checked my watch. It was a Patek Philippe, another silent testament to the success I had hidden from them for years. "You have exactly 24 hours, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "By noon tomorrow, I expect a wire transfer for the full $15 million or the keys to the Kensington Hotel on my desk. If neither happens, my legal team will begin the foreclosure process immediately. And unlike you, I do not miss deadlines." Richard sputtered, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "You cannot do this," he shouted, causing the entire restaurant to fall silent. "We are your family. You cannot evict your own parents." I looked down at him. "You disowned me, remember? You signed the papers. As far as the law is concerned, we are strangers. And business with strangers is strictly professional." I turned to leave but stopped as the restaurant manager Pierre hurried over. He looked anxious, glancing between my shouting father and the shattered plate on the table. "Is everything all right, Ms. Kensington?" Pierre asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Everything is fine, Pierre," I said calmly. "My associates and I are finished. However, there is a small matter regarding the bill." I pointed to the half-empty bottle of vintage Cabernet and the extravagant seafood tower that had barely been touched. "Please bring the check immediately," I instructed, "and Pierre, make sure you run the payment right now while they are still seated." "Why would he do that?" Patricia snapped, trying to regain her composure. "We have an account here. We always pay at the end of the month. Do you know who we are?" I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had worn all night. "Pierre knows who you were, Mother. But things have changed in the last 10 minutes. You see Pierre as the new owner of the Kensington debt portfolio. I have just authorized a total freeze on all corporate assets. That includes the American Express black card my father is reaching for right now." Richard froze his hand halfway to his wallet. "It is declined, Richard," I said softly. "The company accounts are locked. The expense funds are frozen. Every cent you try to spend from this moment on requires my personal approval. And I do not approve of $3,000 dinners for people who just disowned me." I turned back to Pierre. "I will pay for my water. The rest of the bill belongs to them. I suggest you get a personal credit card from them before they leave. And check the limit." The color drained from Brittany's face. She finally stopped recording. For the first time, she realized that the endless stream of money she had swum in since birth had just been turned off at the tap. I walked away. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, a sound of finality. Behind me, I heard the chaotic beep of a credit card machine rejecting a transaction, followed by my father's desperate shouting. I did not look back. I walked out into the cool night air, took a deep breath, and hailed a cab. The war had just begun, and I had fired the first shot. But I knew my family. They would not go down without a fight. They would play dirty. They would weaponize the media. They would use Dion. And I was ready for all of it. The next morning started exactly as I predicted. While I was reviewing the liquidation timeline with my board of directors, my sister Brittany was trying to spend money she no longer had. At 10 in the morning, my phone buzzed against the mahogany conference table. I glanced at the screen. It was Brittany. I was in the middle of a presentation to 10 senior investment bankers explaining how we would carve up the Kensington hotel chain. The room was silent, filled with serious men in expensive suits. I could have sent her to voicemail. But I wanted to make a point. I wanted my team to understand exactly what kind of mismanagement we were dealing with. I picked up the phone and pressed the speaker button. I held up a hand to silence the room. Every eye turned to the phone. "You miserable witch!" Brittany screamed. Her voice was so loud it distorted the speaker. "Fix my card right now! I am standing at the front desk of the Serenity Spa and my Amex just got declined. The receptionist is looking at me like I am a criminal." I leaned back in my chair, calmly folding my hands. Good morning to you too, Brittany. I am currently in a meeting with the acquisition board. You are on speaker. I do not care who is there, she shrieked. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I just got the 24-karat gold facial, and now they are saying I have insufficient funds. Transfer $5,000 to my personal checking right now. The bankers around the table exchanged looks. One of them suppressed a smirk. This was the golden child, the heir apparent, screaming for pocket change while her family empire burned. I warned you last night, Brittany. I said, my voice cool and professional. The corporate accounts are frozen. That includes the slush fund you have been using as a piggy bank for the last decade. You cannot do this, she yelled. I am pregnant. I need to relax. Stress is bad for the baby. Mom said you were just bluffing. She said you would not dare cut us off. Mom was wrong, I replied. It's wrong. And just so we are clear, this is not a technical glitch. I personally flagged your card as stolen property this morning because using company funds for spa treatments when the company is insolvent is technically theft. There was a gasp on the other end of the line. You called the police, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. Not yet, I said. But the spa manager might if you do not pay. I suggest you call your husband Dion. Maybe he has some cash hidden away that I have not found yet. Although judging by the audit I just finished, I doubt it. Audrey, please, she whimpered, changing tactics instantly. People are staring. Just unlock the card for 5 minutes. I will pay you back. I looked around the room at the men who were now taking notes on the family dynamic. It was brutal, but necessary. I am sorry, Brittany. Vulture Capital does not issue credit to high-risk borrowers. Welcome to the real world. I tapped the red button ending the call. The room was dead silent. I looked up at my team. As you can see, gentlemen, the previous management lacked fiscal discipline. That ends today. Now let us turn to page 10 of the foreclosure strategy. The mahogany boardroom of Kensington hotels usually smelled of fresh lilies and expensive cologne. Today it smelled of fear and stale coffee. My father Richard slammed the receiver down onto the cradle with enough force to crack the plastic casing. It was the 10th call he had made in the last hour, and the result was exactly the same as the previous 9. Rejection. Dion sat at the other end of the long table surrounded by stacks of financial reports that looked more like autopsies. The glow of his laptop screen highlighted the dark circles under his eyes. He had been the chief financial officer for 5 years, but in this moment he looked less like an executive and more like a hostage. They all said, "No, Richard." Dion said, his voice flat and exhausted. I just got off the phone with our contact at Chase. I tried the private equity guys in Jersey. I even called the hard money lenders who charge 20% interest. Nobody will touch us. Richard paced the room, tearing at his silk tie as if it were strangling him. That is impossible. We are the Kensingtons. We have assets. We have a legacy. Did you tell them about the downtown expansion plan? Did you show them the projections for next quarter? Dion took off his wire-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Projections do not matter when your credit rating just dropped to junk status overnight. Audrey did not just buy the debt, Richard. She filed a notice of impending insolvency with the credit bureaus. We are radioactive. Every bank sees Vulture Capital on our balance sheet and they run. They know her reputation. If she is involved, it means the company is already a corpse, and she is just here to harvest the organs. Richard stopped pacing. He turned slowly toward his son-in-law. His face was red, blotchy, and twisted with a familiar ugly rage. He did not hear the logic. He only heard failure. And Richard Kensington never accepted blame for failure. So what you are telling me, Richard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, is that you cannot do your job. I hired you to manage the money, Dion. I brought you into this family. I gave you a title. And now when I need you to make a simple transaction, you sit there telling me about credit scores. Dion stiffened. It was the same tone Richard used when he spoke to the cleaning staff. The tone that reminded Dion that no matter how many degrees he had or how hard he worked, he was just a guest in the Kensington kingdom. I am doing my job, Richard. Dion replied, keeping his voice steady despite the anger rising in his chest. I have kept this company afloat for 3 years while you and Patricia drained the accounts for vacations and galas. I warned you 6 months ago that the leverage was too high. You told me to shut up and sign the checks. Richard grabbed a crystal paperweight from the table and hurled it across the room. It smashed into the drywall inches from Dion's head, leaving a dent in the plaster. Do not you dare lecture me, you ungrateful little accountant, Richard roared. You are nothing without me. Brittany could have married a senator or a CEO. She settled for you. And now you are going to let my daughter lose her inheritance because you are too incompetent to find a loophole. Fix this, Dion. Find the money, sell the fleet, mortgage the summer house. I do not care what you have to do. Get me $15 million by tomorrow, or you can pack your bags and get out of my building and my family. Dion looked at the dent in the wall. Then he looked at the man he had called Dad for half a decade. He saw the sweat on Richard's forehead and the pure selfish panic in his eyes. There was no loyalty here. There was no family. There was only a sinking ship and a captain looking for someone to throw overboard. I will see what I can do, Dion said quietly, gathering his papers. Good. Richard snapped, turning his back. And get me a drink. This stress is killing me. Dion walked out of the boardroom. He did not get Richard a drink. Instead, he walked straight to his own office, locked the door, and pulled out his private cell phone. He looked at the contact list. His thumb hovered over a name he had not called in years. Audrey. He did not press call yet. But for the first time since marrying into this nightmare, he realized that the villain of the story might actually be his only lifeline. By noon, the court of public opinion was in session and my mother was the presiding judge. I sat in my corner office overlooking Manhattan, watching the notification light on my private phone blink incessantly. It was a rhythmic red pulse. Warning, warning, warning. My assistant Sarah walked in holding a tablet. She looked pale. You need to see this, Ms. Kensington, she said, placing the device on my desk. It is trending on Twitter and Facebook. Your mother just posted a statement. I looked at the screen. Patricia had chosen a photo from 10 years ago. In it, she was smiling and hugging a teenage me who looked uncomfortable. The caption was a masterpiece of fiction. My heart is shattered today, Patricia wrote. To raise a child with love, only to have her turn on you, is a mother's worst nightmare. We have just learned that our daughter Audrey has been manipulated by a wealthy older man at a predatory equity firm. She is using her illicit relationship with this tycoon to destroy her own family's legacy. We are being evicted because she chose her lover over her blood. Please pray for us as we navigate this betrayal. I scrolled down. The comments were brutal. Strangers were calling me a gold digger, a traitor. Someone wrote that I should be ashamed of selling my body to destroy my parents. The narrative was perfect. The struggling family business versus the slutty daughter and her sugar daddy. Sarah hesitated. The press is calling. They want to comment on your relationship with the owner of Vulture Capital. Do you want me to draft a denial? I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. My mother had made a fatal error. By accusing me of sleeping with the owner to get ahead, she had not just insulted me. She had accused a CEO of trading sexual favors for corporate assets. That was quantifiable damage. No press release. Sarah, I said, standing up and walking to the window. My mother wants a war of words because she is good at lying. I do not fight with words, I fight with laws. I picked up my desk phone and dialed my general counsel. James, I said, as soon as he answered. Did you see Patricia's post? I am looking at it right now, James replied. It is defamation per se. She is accusing you of professional misconduct and sexual impropriety. It is libel. Good, I said. I want you to file a lawsuit against Patricia Kensington for defamation and tortious interference with business relations. I want seeking damages of $5 million. And James, I want the papers served immediately. But where James asked, we usually mail them to their attorney. No, I said, watching the traffic crawl on the streets below. I want a process server. And I know exactly where she is. She is at the country club having lunch with the ladies' auxiliary trying to garner sympathy. Send the server there. I want her served in front of the very audience she is trying to manipulate. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Dion. "You have to stop this, Audrey," he hissed. "The sheriff just walked into the country club dining room." Mom fainted, or pretended to faint. "It is a circus. Everyone is talking about the lawsuit." She wanted attention. "Dion," I replied calmly. "I just gave it to her. She accused me of sleeping with the owner of Vulture Capital. Since I am the owner, I am pretty sure that is physically impossible unless I am extremely flexible." Dion went silent. The logic was undeniable. "She is saying she will countersue," Dion said weakly. "Let her," I said. "Discovery will be fun. I will get to depose her under oath about where the trust fund money really went. Do you think she is ready for that, Dion? Are you?" I hung up. My mother thought she could use shame to control me. She forgot that shame only works on people who have something to hide. I had nothing to hide. I only had the truth. And a very expensive legal team. At 2 in the afternoon, the tranquility of the Kensington estate was shattered by the grinding sound of heavy diesel engines. I did not come alone. I brought a convoy. 3 flatbed tow trucks emblazoned with the logo of Metro Asset Recovery rolled up the long cobblestone driveway. I watched from the back seat of my black town car as the lead driver buzzed the intercom. When no one answered, he simply used the override code I had provided. The wrought iron gates swung open. My mother Patricia stood on the front porch in her silk caftan clutching a martini glass. She looked like a deposed queen watching her castle be sacked, but it was my sister Brittany who provided the real entertainment. As the first tow truck backed up toward the detached 6-car garage, Brittany burst out of the house. She was barefoot, wearing yoga pants and a t-shirt that said bride-to-be, despite having been married for 5 years. "You cannot take them," she screamed, running toward the garage doors. "These are private property. My husband bought these." I stepped out of my car and walked up the driveway. The gravel crunched beneath my heels. "Actually, Brittany," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the idling trucks. "The company bought these." I reviewed the books. The Ferrari 488 Spider, the G-Wagon, even the vintage Porsche your father drives on Sundays. They are all listed as company vehicles for the Kensington Hotel Group. Brittany looked at me with wild eyes. She scrambled toward the bright red Ferrari, which was currently being hooked up to the winch. In a move of pure desperation, she threw herself onto the driveway. She laid flat on her back right in front of the low bumper of the sports car, spreading her arms and legs like a starfish. "Run me over, then," she shrieked. "You will have to kill me and my unborn child to take this car. It is essential for my mental health." The tow truck driver, a burly man named Mike, looked at me and sighed. He had seen it all before, but even he looked impressed by the theatrics. I walked over and stood over her. I blocked the sun, casting a long shadow over her face. "Get up, Brittany," I said. "You are embarrassing yourself. And more importantly, you are scratching the paint. That car is now an asset of Vulture Capital, and if you damage it, I will add the repair cost to your personal debt." She did not move. She started fake crying, loud, heaving sobs meant to attract the neighbors. "This is my car," she wailed. I picked out the leather. "It is custom. You are just jealous because you drive a sedan." I signaled to Mike. "Lift it." Mike hesitated. "Ma, she is under the wheels." "She will move," I said. I nodded at Mike. He engaged the winch. The cable tightened with a loud metallic groan. The front of the Ferrari lifted 2 inches off the ground. Brittany scrambled backward, crab-walking on her hands and feet to get away from the moving tires. She stood up, dusting gravel off her expensive yoga pants, her face red with humiliation. "You are a monster," she hissed. "No, Brittany," I said, checking the inventory list on my clipboard. "I am a liquidator, and you have been driving a tax write-off for 3 years. I turned to the drivers. "Take them all. The G-Wagon is next, and be careful with the Porsche. That one is going to auction next week." As the Ferrari was hoisted onto the flatbed, I saw my father watching from the window. He did not come out. He knew he could not stop me. He was hiding, but he could not hide forever. The house was next. The glass doors of the Kensington Hotel Group headquarters slid open with a whisper. I walked across the marble lobby, the sound of my heels echoing against the vaulted ceiling. For years, this building had been a fortress where I was denied entry. I used to sit on the uncomfortable bench near the security desk waiting for hours just to get a 5-minute meeting with my father. The receptionists would sneer at me. The junior executives would check their watches and roll their eyes. Today, the atmosphere was different. As I bypassed the security turnstile using my override keycard, the silence in the room was absolute. I could feel eyes on me. Fearful eyes. They had seen the news. They knew the tow trucks were at the mansion. They knew the hierarchy had shifted. I took the private elevator to the top floor. When the doors opened, I walked straight toward the executive suite. Sitting outside my father's office was Vanessa. She had been his executive assistant for 10 years. She was also the reason my mother drank so many martinis, although Patricia would never admit it publicly. Vanessa was 20 years younger than my father and wore a Cartier bracelet that cost more than a housekeeper's annual salary. She stood up as I approached, blocking the double doors. Her face was a mask of disdain. "You cannot go in there, Audrey," she said, her voice sharp. "Mr. Kensington is in a crisis meeting." He gave strict instructions. "No visitors, especially not family members who are trying to destroy this company." I stopped in front of her desk. I did not raise my voice. I did not lose my temper. I simply placed a single sheet of paper on her perfectly organized workspace. "I am not a visitor, Vanessa," I said calmly. "And I am not family. I am the new owner of this building, and you are standing in my way." She laughed. It was a nervous sound. "You think a piece of paper makes you the boss. Richard will have you removed by security." "Actually, security is on their way up," I replied. "But they are coming for you." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me." I tapped the paper on her desk. "I spent the morning reviewing the discretionary spending accounts for the executive suite. It seems the company has been paying $50,000 a month in consulting fees to a firm called VK Solutions." Vanessa went pale. Her hand instinctively covered the diamond pendant around her neck. I continued, my voice devoid of emotion. "I looked up the registration for VK Solutions. It is a shell company registered to your home address, Vanessa. Embezzling company funds to pay for your lifestyle is a felony. And unless you want me to hand this audit over to the district attorney along with the photos of you and my father on the company yacht in the Mediterranean, I suggest you start packing." She looked at the closed doors of my father's office, then back at me. She realized Richard could not save her. If he tried, he would have to admit to the affair in court. She was alone. "I am giving you 5 minutes to collect your personal effects," I said, checking my watch. "Leave the company laptop and the phone. And Vanessa, if you try to delete a single email, I will press charges so fast you will be in handcuffs before you reach the lobby." She did not say a word. She grabbed her purse, her hands shaking violently, and practically ran toward the elevators, leaving her desk abandoned. I looked around the open-plan office. Every junior executive and assistant was staring at me. They looked terrified. "Get back to work," I announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "As long as you are not stealing from me, your jobs are safe, for now." I pushed open the heavy oak doors to my father's office. It was time to take the chair he said I would never sit in. By 5 in the afternoon, the narrative had shifted from financial fraud to medical emergency. Brittany played her part perfectly. Just as the last tow truck disappeared around the bend, carrying away her beloved G-Wagon, she grabbed her stomach and collapsed onto the gravel driveway. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. My mother, Patricia, did not call 911 first. She called the press. By the time the ambulance arrived at Lenox Hill Hospital, the paparazzi were already lined up outside the emergency room entrance. I sat in my office watching the live coverage on the wall-mounted monitors. The headline on the news ticker was in bold red letters: "Vulture Capital CEO endangers heiress and unborn child." The camera zoomed in on my mother. She was standing outside the hospital doors wearing large sunglasses and clutching a tissue. She looked devastated. It was the stress. Patricia sobbed into the cluster of microphones. My daughter Brittany is in critical condition. Her sister came to our home with armed guards and tow trucks. She screamed at a pregnant woman. She threatened us. Brittany was so terrified that she collapsed. If we lose this baby, the blood is on Audrey's hands. The reporter turned to the camera, her face grave. You heard it here first. A family dispute turns tragic as ruthless financier Audrey Kensington allegedly pushes her pregnant sister to the brink. Social media is already calling for a boycott of Vulture Capital. I turned off the volume, but I could still see the images. Brittany being wheeled in on a stretcher, an oxygen mask over her face, her hand limply hanging off the side. It was convincing. The public was eating it up. My phone was blowing up with death threats. People were calling me a monster, a baby killer, and a heartless witch. My assistant Sarah walked in looking terrified. The board is calling Audrey. They are worried about the optics. Our stock dropped 2 points in the last hour. They want you to issue an apology. They want you to reinstate the family accounts until Brittany is stable. I stared at the frozen image of my sister on the screen. I knew Brittany. I knew that she had used a fake appendicitis to get out of finals in college. I knew she had faked a migraine to avoid being a bridesmaid at her best friend's wedding. And I knew for a fact that stress does not cause a miscarriage unless there is underlying trauma. But mostly, I suspected something else. I remembered the wine at dinner. Brittany had taken a sip before realizing the camera was on. I remembered the sushi she ate last week on her Instagram story. Raw fish. Tell the board to hold tight, I said, standing up. I am not apologizing. And I am certainly not turning the money back on, but Audrey. Sarah stammered. The whole world hates you right now. If she loses the baby, you will be pariah. She is not going to lose the baby, Sarah, I said, grabbing my coat. Because I have a very strong suspicion that there is no baby to lose. I am going to the hospital. I continued walking to the door. Not to visit, but to pay the bill. And when you pay the bill, you get to see the itemized receipt. Patricia thinks she can use medical privacy laws to hide the truth. She forgot that as the owner of the debt, I am legally the guarantor of their health insurance policy. I walked out of the office. The press was waiting downstairs. I put on my sunglasses. Let them hate me. Let them call me a monster. In an hour, I was going to be the monster who walked into the lion's den and pulled out the truth. And if I was right, this sympathy play was going to be the final nail in their coffin. The automatic doors of the private maternity ward slid open. The air inside smelled of antiseptic and expensive flower arrangements. I walked past the security desk, my heels making no sound on the sterile tile. I did not need a visitor pass. I owned the insurance policy that was paying for every single person in this room. My mother, Patricia, was sitting on a plush beige sofa, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee. When she saw me, she stood up so fast she spilled the liquid on her silk blouse. You have some nerve coming here, Patricia hissed, her voice shaking with theatrical rage. After what you did. Brittany is in there fighting for her baby because of the stress you caused. If you take one step closer to that room, I will scream for security. I stopped and adjusted my sunglasses. I am not here to visit Patricia. I am here to settle the account. Since I froze the company assets, I assumed you would want me to authorize the payment for this emergency visit. Unless, of course, you have $10,000 in cash hidden in that handbag. Dion stepped out of Brittany's hospital room. He looked exhausted. He was holding a stack of admission forms. Audrey, he said, his voice low. Just go. We do not want your money. We just want peace. I looked at my brother-in-law. I actually felt a moment of pity for him. He was a smart man, trapped in a house of mirrors. I am not leaving Dion, I said, taking a step closer. In fact, I have already spoken to the hospital administrator. I am willing to cover the entire cost of the stay. I will even upgrade her to the presidential suite. I will fly in the best specialists from Mount Sinai. Patricia narrowed her eyes. What is the catch? No catch, I replied, shrugging. I just need to verify the liability. As the guarantor of the company health plan, I have the right to review the itemized medical invoice to ensure there is no insurance fraud. All Brittany has to do is sign a limited HIPAA waiver, allowing me to see the admission charts and the ultrasound results. The door to the hospital room flew open. Brittany stood there wrapped in a hospital gown. She looked perfectly fine for someone who was supposedly on the brink of a miscarriage. Her face was flushed, not with pain, but with panic. "No," she screamed. "Absolutely not. My medical records are private. You are just trying to find something to use against me in court. I will not sign anything." I looked at her. Then I looked at Dion. "Dion," I said, my voice soft but lethal. "You are a finance guy. You know how this works. If there is nothing to hide, why refuse the upgrade? Why refuse the best doctors in the city?" Dion looked at his wife. "Brittany, just sign the waiver. Let her pay. We need the money." "I cannot," Brittany shrieked. "She is trying to trick us. Get her out of here, Dion." I laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound. "She is not refusing because of privacy, Dion," I said, turning to him. "She is refusing because there is no baby." The silence in the hallway was absolute. Patricia gasped. Brittany went pale. "How dare you?" Patricia shouted. "Think about it, Dion." I continued, ignoring my mother. "Have you ever actually been inside the room for an ultrasound? Or does she always make you wait in the lobby because she wants it to be a surprise? Have you seen the prenatal vitamins?" I checked the bathroom cabinet at the house while the movers were packing. There were none. But I did find a very empty bottle of Pinot Grigio in her vanity drawer. Dion looked at Brittany. His eyes were wide, searching her face for the truth. He was replaying the last 4 months in his head. The vague excuses, the closed doors, the way she never let him touch her stomach. "Brittany," Dion whispered, "show her the chart. Prove her wrong." Brittany backed into the room and slammed the door. The lock clicked. I looked at Dion. The doubt was eating him alive. "I will be at my office, Dion. When you are ready to see the real balance sheet, give me a call." I turned and walked away, leaving them in the silence of their own lies. I did not need to see the chart. I already knew the diagnosis. The only thing Brittany was pregnant with was deceit. And the labor pains were just beginning. At exactly 12 noon, my watch beeped. The 24-hour grace period was over. I sat at my desk looking at the wire transfer portal on my monitor. It was empty. 0 incoming funds. 0 pending transactions. The Kensingtons had failed. My office phone rang. It was not Dion this time. It was Richard. I put him on speaker so my legal team could hear the desperation. "Audrey, please," he begged. His voice was cracked and broken. "We need more time. We are liquidating the jewelry. Patricia is calling her friends. We can get you 2 million by Friday." 2 million is not 15 million, Richard. I said, my finger hovering over the execute button on my keyboard. "And Friday is not today. You signed a contract. You violated the terms. And now you face the consequences." "You cannot do this," he shouted. "That house has been in the family for 4 generations. It is our legacy. You cannot just take it because of a bad quarter." "It is collateral," I corrected him. "And as of 1 minute ago, it is foreclosed property." I pressed the enter key. On the screen, the status of the Kensington loan changed from delinquent to default. Instantly, automated emails were sent to the county clerk, the sheriff department, and the auction houses. I picked up the receiver to deliver the final blow. "Richard, I have just authorized the public auction of the Kensington estate. It is scheduled for next Tuesday at 10 in the morning." There was a silence on the other end, so profound I thought the line had gone dead. Then I heard a sob. It was my mother in the background. "Next Tuesday," Richard whispered. "That is less than a week. Where are we supposed to go?" "That is not my concern," I replied, cold and efficient. "I suggest you start packing because the open house for potential buyers starts on Monday. And Richard, do not try to take the chandeliers. They are listed as fixtures in the mortgage deed. If anything is missing, I will have you arrested for theft." He screamed something unintelligible, but I hung up. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. They wanted to cut me out of the family. They wanted to erase me. Now I was the one holding the eraser. And I was going to scrub them clean until there was nothing left but their name on a foreclosure sign. The house was gone. The cars were gone. The reputation was destroyed. But I was not done. I still had one more layer to peel back. I needed to find out the truth about the trust fund and why they were so desperate to make me sign that waiver. The auction was just the distraction. The real secret was buried deeper, and I was going to dig it up. The penthouse apartment I owned in Tribeca was not listed under my name. It was held by a shell corporation. Within a shell corporation, a fortress of anonymity I had built to keep my private life separate from the vultures of Wall Street. Yet somehow my parents had found it. Desperation, it seemed, was an excellent investigator. At 11 at night, my phone alerted me to movement at the front door. I was sitting in my living room nursing a glass of bourbon, the city lights sprawling below me like a sea of diamonds. I picked up my tablet and tapped on the security feed. There they were. Richard and Patricia Kensington, huddled in the hallway of my building. They looked out of place, stripped of their usual entourage and arrogance. Richard was wearing a hoodie that looked brand new, likely bought at a convenience store to hide his face, but he had forgotten to take off his signature gold loafers. Patricia was nervously checking the hallway, clutching a large designer tote bag that I suspected contained lock-picking tools or a crowbar. I watched as Richard tried to slide a credit card between the door and the frame. It was pathetic. My door was reinforced steel with a biometric lock. He might as well have been trying to open a bank vault with a toothpick. I pressed the intercom button on my tablet, my voice projecting through the hidden speaker above their heads. "You are going to scratch the finish, Richard," I said, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. "And that is mahogany veneer. It is very expensive to replace." My parents jumped. Patricia let out a small scream and dropped her bag. A heavy metal clank resonated from inside it. Richard hissed, looking around wildly. "Open this door, we need to talk." "We are talking," I replied, taking a sip of my drink. "But you seem to be under the impression that this is a social call. Judging by the crowbar I heard in Mom's bag, I would say this is attempted burglary." "Open the door," Patricia shouted, abandoning the stealth approach. "We know you have the original contract in there. We know you stole the trust fund documents. We are just here to take back what is ours." I laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. "You think I keep $15 million worth of legal documents in my sock drawer? This is the digital age, Mother. The originals are in a vault in Zurich. The copies are on a server in the cloud. Breaking into my apartment will get you nothing but a felony charge to add to your collection." Richard kicked the door in frustration. "You ungrateful brat. We gave you life. We raised you. And this is how you repay us, by stealing our home, by humiliating your sister. You humiliated yourselves," I said, watching Richard, his face turn red on the high-definition screen. "And as for raising me, let us be honest. Nannies raised me. Boarding schools raised me. You just paid the bills until you decided I was not a good enough investment." I saw Richard reach into his pocket. He pulled out a small black device, an electronic signal jammer. He had come prepared. He was trying to disable my security system. "Do not bother," I said. "That jammer is illegal, Richard. And my system is hardwired. But congratulations, you just added possession of burglary tools and electronic sabotage to the police report." "Police," Patricia whispered, grabbing Richard's arm. I tapped the screen, switching the view to the lobby camera. Two uniformed officers were walking through the front entrance, guided by my doorman. "They are already in the elevator," I announced. "I suggest you drop the crowbar and the jammer. If you run, you will just look guilty. If you stay, you can try to explain to the NYPD why the prestigious Kensingtons are trying to break into a private residence at midnight." Richard looked at the camera lens, his eyes filled with pure venom. "This is not over, Audrey. We will destroy you." I smiled at the screen. "You are welcome to try, Dad, but you might want to call your lawyer first. You only have one phone call from Central Booking." I watched as the elevator doors opened behind them. The officers stepped out. The look of defeat on my parents' faces was worth every penny I had spent on this security system. I turned off the tablet. The game was escalating and they were making mistakes. Desperate people always do. But I knew this was just the beginning. They were cornered rats, and cornered rats bite. I needed to be ready for the next attack, and I knew exactly where it would come from. The past. The hallway of my building was bathed in harsh fluorescent light. The two officers had Richard pressed against the wall, reading him his rights. He was sputtering about lawyers and lawsuits, but the metal handcuffs clicking around his wrists silenced him for a moment. My mother stood frozen near the elevator, her designer bag at her feet, looking at me with a mixture of terror and indignation. "Tell them to stop, Audrey," Patricia pleaded, her voice cracking. "This is a misunderstanding. We are your parents. You cannot let them arrest us for trying to see our daughter." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I watched the scene with a detachment that had taken me a decade to perfect. "See my daughter," I repeated. "You did not come here to see me, Mother. You came here to steal back the leverage I have over you, just like you stole my financial future the day I turned 18. Patricia stiffened. She looked at the officers, then back at me, lowering her voice to a hiss. "Do not bring up ancient history. That is irrelevant." "Is it?" I asked, stepping into the hallway. The officers watched us but didn't intervene. They knew a domestic dispute when they saw one. "I remember my 18th birthday." I continued, my voice steady and cold. "You did not give me a cake. You gave me a student loan application." And when the bank rejected it, I was confused. I had never borrowed a dime in my life, but the bank officer told me I had $50,000 in outstanding credit card debt. Richard turned his head, trying to look back at me. "We had cash flow issues, Audrey. We needed to pay vendors. We intended to pay it back." "Intended," I laughed. "You maxed out 5 cards in my name. You forged my signature. You used my social security number to buy new furniture for the hotel lobby while I was eating instant noodles and working 3 jobs to pay for community college." Patricia stepped forward, her face twisting into a sneer. "Oh, stop playing the victim. It is unbecoming. You survived, didn't you? You are rich now, so what if we used your credit? We fed you. We clothed you for 18 years. It was the least you could do. The least I could do," I asked, feeling the old anger burn in my chest. "Yes," Patricia shouted, losing her composure. "Children have an obligation to their family. You were an asset of the Kensington family. When the family needs resources, you provide them. That is how the world works. You should have been honored to help save the legacy. Instead, you ran away and whined about credit scores. You are selfish, Audrey. You always have been." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. There was no remorse, no guilt. In her mind, I was simply a piece of property that had malfunctioned. She genuinely believed that identity theft was her parental right. "You are right, Mother," I said softly. "I was an asset. And you leveraged me until I broke. I spent 10 years fixing the mess you made. 10 years of being rejected for apartments, for car loans, for jobs, because my background check showed me as a delinquent. I had to build my empire on cash because no bank would touch me." I walked up to her, invading her personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and gin. "But you taught me a valuable lesson," I whispered. "You taught me that in this family debt is a weapon. And now I am holding the gun." I turned to the officers. "Take them away. I will be down to the precinct in the morning to file the formal charges for the break-in. And officer, please add identity fraud to the investigation. I believe the statute of limitations has not run out on the new accounts they tried to open in my name last year." Patricia gasped. "You knew about that?" "I know everything," I said as the elevator doors opened. "I am the vulture, remember? I see every rot in the carcass." As the doors closed on her screaming face, I felt a strange sense of peace. The past was no longer a secret. It was evidence, and I was going to use every single year of suffering to bury them. But first, I had a meeting with the one person who could hand me the final shovel: Dayon. The private booth at the vault was dark enough to hide a fugitive. I sat in the corner, swirling a glass of sparkling water, waiting for the only member of the Kensington family who possessed a brain. Dayon slid into the seat opposite me. He looked like a man who had been running a marathon in a suit made of lead. His tie was loose and his eyes were bloodshot. "You look terrible, Dayon," I said, placing my glass down. He let out a dry laugh, rubbing his face with both hands. Your parents are currently in a holding cell, screaming for a lawyer. Your sister is locked in her room, threatening to sue the hospital. And I have spent the last 6 hours trying to explain to the board why our accounts are frozen. How do you expect me to look? He ordered a double whiskey neat. When it arrived, he drank half of it in one swallow. You have to stop this, Audrey. He leaned forward, his voice desperate. I know they hurt you. I know they are toxic. But this is total destruction. Richard is going to have a heart attack. Richard is too mean to die, I replied calmly. And I am not destroying them, Dion. I am just letting gravity take its course. They built a house of cards. I just opened a window. Dion shook his head. They are still family. They took me in when I was just a junior analyst. They gave me a chance. I reached into my bag. This was the moment. The moment I would either save a good man or destroy him. Did they give you a chance, Dion? Or did they give you a job that no one else wanted? You are the CFO. You do the work of 10 men. You fix their messes. You hide their debt. But is your name on the door? Do you have equity? Or are you just the guy they blame when the check bounces? Dion looked away. That is complicated. It is not complicated, I said, sliding a tablet across the table. It is prejudice. He looked at the tablet. What is this? I archived the company servers before I locked you out, I explained. I did a keyword search on your name in Richard and Patricia, is private email accounts. I think you should read what they say about you when you leave the room. Dion hesitated. Then he picked up the tablet. I watched his eyes scan the screen. The first email was from Richard to Patricia, dated 3 years ago. Subject line regarding the new CFO. The text read, We have to keep Dion. He is good with numbers. Plus, having a black man in the C-suite looks good for our diversity quota. Just do not let him join the country club. The members would not like it. Dion flinched. He swiped to the next one. This one was from Patricia. Subject line, Brittany is wedding. The text read, Make sure Dion knows his place. He is lucky we are letting him marry into this family. We need his brain to fix the books, but never forget he is basically high-priced help. Keep him away from the donor table. I saw a tear form in Dion's eye. He swiped again, and again. Dozens of emails, slurs, mockery, comments about his background, comments about his skin color. They called him their pet, their servant, their necessary evil. He put the tablet down gently. His hand was trembling. They laughed at me, he whispered. All these years. I worked 80-hour weeks. I saved them from bankruptcy twice. And they were laughing at me. I reached out and took his hand. They do not respect you, Dion. They never did. To them, you are just a tool. And when a tool stops working, they throw it away. Just like they threw me away. He looked up at me. The exhaustion in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. It was the look of a man who had just realized he had been sleeping with the enemy. What do you want me to do, Audrey? He asked. I smiled. I want you to help me finish it. I want the real books, Dion. The ones Richard keeps hidden. Dion picked up his whiskey and finished it. Then he looked me dead in the eye. Meet me tomorrow at 6, he said. I know where Richard hides the safe key. And Audrey. Burn them. Burn them all to the ground. Dion pushed the tablet away as if it were radioactive. He ran a hand over his shaved head, his breathing shallow and rapid. The emails were not just insults. They were a documentation of systematic dehumanization. But habit is a powerful drug, and Dion had been addicted to the Kensington lifestyle for 5 years. I cannot do it, Audrey, he said, his voice cracking. If I give you the real books, I am violating my non-disclosure agreement. Richard will sue me into oblivion. And Brittany, she is pregnant. If I destroy her family, she will never let me see my child. I watched him struggle. It was like watching a bird that had been in a cage so long it was afraid of the open door. Dion, look at me, I said, leaning forward. You are worried about a child that might not even exist. You saw her at the hospital. You saw the wine. You saw the refusal to show medical records. She is my wife, Dion whispered, but his eyes were full of doubt. She says she is pregnant. I have to believe her. If there is even a 1% chance that I am a father, I cannot blow up her world. The prenuptial agreement I signed says if I file for divorce or act against the family interests, I get nothing. No custody, no assets. I will be back to being a junior analyst in a studio apartment. I took a sip of my water. So that is it. It is not about love, it is about fear. You are afraid to be poor again. You are afraid Richard will crush you. He creates kings and he destroys them, Audrey. You know that. He used to create kings, I corrected. Now he is just an old man facing an indictment. And as for the prenuptial agreement, I had my lawyers look at it. It is void if the family engages in criminal activity. Which brings us back to the books. Dion stood up. He grabbed his jacket, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. I need time. I cannot just hand you the smoking gun. This is treason. I stood up too, blocking his path to the exit. I did not touch him. I just stared him down. Treason against a tyrant is called revolution, Dion. And you are running out of time. Tomorrow morning I am filing a motion for discovery. If I find those double books on my own without your help, you will be named as a co-conspirator. You will go to prison with Richard. And you cannot raise a child from a cell. He looked at me. For a second, I saw the hate in his eyes. Not for me, but for the situation. For the trap he had walked into 5 years ago when he said I do. I will think about it, he said. Do not think too long, I warned. The offer expires at dawn. He walked out of the dark bar into the neon-lit street. He looked small, defeated. But I knew Dion. He was a survivor. He would go home and he would look for the truth. He would test Brittany. And when she failed that test, he would come back to me. The seed of doubt had been planted. Now I just had to wait for it to break through the concrete. The celebration lasted exactly 12 hours. By 10 o'clock the next morning, a courier arrived at my office with a thick manila envelope that smelled of cheap cologne and desperation. I opened it and felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. It was a court order signed by a judge who was notorious for being lenient on white-collar criminals. Temporary restraining order and stay of execution regarding the foreclosure of the Kensington estate. I threw the papers onto my desk. Richard had been busy. He must have used his one phone call from the precinct to contact Gavin Thorne. Thorne was a lawyer who had been disbarred in 2 states, but was somehow still practicing in New York. He was known as the Cockroach because he could survive any legal nuclear blast, and he specialized in dragging out simple cases for decades. My general counsel, James, walked in looking grim. You saw it then. Thorne filed an emergency motion at dawn. He is arguing that your acquisition of the debt was a violation of fiduciary duty because of your familial relationship. He claims you used insider knowledge gained during private family gatherings to target the asset. It is a conflict of interest argument. It is a lie, I said, staring at the judge represents signature. I have not been to a family gathering in 3 years. They disowned me, remember? It does not matter if it is true. James sighed, sitting down. It only matters that it is a triable issue of fact. The judge granted a 30-day stay to review the evidence. We cannot auction the house next Tuesday, Audrey. If we try, we will be held in contempt of court. Richard bought himself a month. And in a month he might find a way to hide assets or file for bankruptcy protection, which would freeze us for years. I walked to the window. Below me, the city moved with a frantic energy. My father was out on bail and he was already laughing at me. He thought he had won. He thought that by tying my hands with red tape, he could wait me out. He forgot that I was ambidextrous. Read the order again, James said, turning around. Read the fine print of paragraph 4. James picked up the document, adjusting his glasses. It says the plaintiff is prohibited from transferring title selling or encumbering the property known as the Kensington estate during the pendency of this motion. Exactly, I said, walking back to my desk and pressing the intercom button for my security chief. The judge stopped the sale. He stopped the transfer of title. But he did not void the original loan agreement. And under Clause 19 of that agreement, the lender has the right to install an emergency management team if the asset is deemed to be at risk of depreciation. James looked up, his eyes widening. You want to take over operations. I do not just want to take over James. I am appointing myself the interim general manager of the Kensington Hotel Group effective immediately. The judge said I cannot sell the house. He did not say I cannot live in it. And he certainly did not say I cannot fire the current incompetent management team to protect my investment. I grabbed my coat. Richard thinks he bought himself a month of freedom. He just bought himself 30 days of hell. Get the car, James. We are going to the hotel, and call the locksmith. If I cannot evict them, I am going to become the worst roommate in history. I am going to audit every paperclip while sitting at Richard Represent's desk. And I am going to do it while eating his lunch. The auction is off. The hostile occupation is on. The locksmith packed up his tools and left me alone in my father's office. Behind the tacky portrait of Richard Kensington stood a wall safe that had not been opened in decades. I did not find stacks of cash or gold bars inside. I found something far more dangerous. I found the truth. I pulled out the yellowing documents labeled the Theodore Kensington Revocable Trust. My parents had spent my entire life dangling this trust over my head like a carrot. They claimed it held millions in offshore accounts. They claimed it was the key to our dynasty. They claimed that by disowning me, they were protecting this treasure from my influence. I sat in Richard's oversized leather chair and began to read. By page 10, I started to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who just watched their enemy walk off a cliff while holding a map. The trust was not an asset. It was the aggressive tax shelter scheme from the late 80s that had failed spectacularly. The principal amount had been eaten up by bad investments in the 90s. What remained was a tax liability of $40 million that had been deferring interest for 30 years. The document was a ticking time bomb. The moment the trust was transferred to a beneficiary, the IRS lien would activate. The debt would become due immediately. James walked in holding a coffee. He saw the papers spread out on the desk and the strange look on my face. You look like you just found a murder weapon, he said. I looked up at him. Better, James. I found a suicide note. My parents think I am fighting them to get back into the will. They think I want a piece of this pie. They hired Gavin Thorne to stop me from claiming my share. James walked over and looked at the ledger. He adjusted his glasses and squinted. But this is worthless, Audrey. It is negative equity. If you inherit this, you inherit the debt. You would be bankrupt instantly. Exactly, I said. But they do not know that. They never read the fine print. They just saw the word trust and assumed it meant money. That is why they made me sign the disownment papers. They thought they were cutting me out of a fortune. I stood up and walked to the window. The irony was delicious. If I had not signed those papers at the restaurant, I would still be a legal heir. I would be on the hook for a third of that $40 million debt. By forcing me out, they had inadvertently saved my life and doomed themselves. We have to change strategy, James, I said, turning back to him. We are not going to tell them. James looked confused. You want to let them inherit the debt. I want them to fight for it, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. If I drop the lawsuit, they might get suspicious. They might actually read the documents. But if I act like a greedy daughter trying to claw her way back into the will, they will fight twice as hard to keep me out. They will spend their last dime on legal fees to ensure Brittany gets every single cent of that trust. I picked up the original document and placed it back in the safe. Draft a new motion, James. We are going to contest the disownment. We are going to claim that I was coerced and that I demand 50% of the trust. Make it sound desperate. Make it sound greedy. I want Richard and Patricia to think they are winning. I want them to run toward that finish line with open arms so they can be the ones to catch the falling knife. Brittany wants a legacy. I am going to make sure she gets one. The grand ballroom of the Kensington Hotel was a masterpiece of denial. Despite the fact that the company accounts were frozen and the staff was whispering about layoffs, my sister Brittany was standing in the center of the dance floor, screaming at a florist. I said, "White orchids," Brittany shouted, pointing a manicured finger at the trembling event planner. Not lilies. Lilies look cheap, and I want the champagne tower to be 6 feet tall. This is my 30th birthday, not a funeral. I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine watching the circus. My mother Patricia was right beside her, nodding aggressively. Exactly, Patricia chimed in. We need to show the city that the Kensingtons are still standing. The rumors are destroying our social standing. This party needs to be flawless. We invited the mayor. We invited the press. This is not just a birthday. It is a statement of resilience. I walked down the marble staircase, my heels clicking rhythmically. The event planner looked up at me with eyes that screamed, "Help me." He knew I was the one signing the checks now. Audrey Brittany sneered as I approached. Dawn, not even try to stop this. Daddy spoken to his lawyer. The judge issued a stay. You cannot sell the hotel, and you cannot stop us from using the facilities. This is our home, and I am having my party. I looked around the room. They were ordering ice sculptures imported from Sweden. They wanted a live string quartet and a DJ. They were planning to burn through $50,000 in a single night to impress people who secretly despise them. I picked up a sample of the silk tablecloths they had chosen. You are right, Brittany, I said, my voice calm. The court order does allow for business as usual. And if you think a birthday party constitutes essential business operations, who am I to argue? Brittany blinked. She had expected a fight. She had expected me to scream about the budget. My mother looked suspicious. You are letting us do it, Patricia asked, narrowing her eyes. I am encouraging it, I replied. In fact, why stop at orchids? You should order the beluga caviar. Get the vintage Dom Perignon. If you want to prove to the world that the Kensingtons are untouchable, you should go all out. Brittany smiled a smug, victorious smile. She turned to the planner. You heard her. Double the order. And I want a red carpet out front. Dion was standing by the service entrance holding a clipboard. He looked at me, his face pale. He walked over to me as Brittany and Patricia went back to arguing about the centerpiece. Audrey, what are you doing? Dion whispered. We do not have the liquidity for this. You are letting them dig a deeper hole. I looked at my brother-in-law. He was the only one who saw the cliff edge. It is not a hole, Dion, I said softly. It is a stage. They invited the press, remember. They invited the elite. They want an audience. But why? Dion asked. Because when the clock strikes midnight, the carriage turns back into a pumpkin, I said, watching my sister twirl in the center of the empty room. Or in this case, when the party starts, the truth comes out. Let them have their night, Dion. Let them wear their diamonds and drink their champagne. I turned to walk away, pausing just long enough to look back at the chaotic preparations. Enjoy the party, Brittany, I said under my breath. It will be the last one you ever host. Tuesday night arrived wrapped in silk and dipped in gold. The Kensington Hotel ballroom looked like a fever dream of wealth. A 6-foot tower of crystal coupes overflowed with vintage champagne, creating a waterfall of bubbles that sparkled under the massive chandeliers. My sister Brittany had gotten her wish. The room smelled of white orchids and denial. From the mezzanine balcony, I watched the performance art of the century. My parents, Richard and Patricia, stood at the entrance greeting the city elite with practiced smiles. They shook hands with the mayor. They laughed with the board members of the local charities. They looked like royalty secure in their castle. No one in that room knew that the castle was built on quicksand, and I was holding the shovel. Patricia wore an emerald gown that I knew she had charged to the corporate account just hours before the freeze. She leaned in to whisper to the wife of a senator, probably spreading lies about my mental instability to cover up the lawsuit. Richard looked flushed and manic, slapping backs and ordering more wine, trying to drown out the reality that his empire was hours away from extinction. But amidst the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, one figure stood out like a warning beacon. Dion. My brother-in-law stood near the service entrance, gripping a glass of soda water so hard his knuckles were white. He was not smiling, he was sweating. Every 30 seconds he checked his watch. He looked at the main doors, then back at his watch, then up at me. Our eyes locked for a brief second. He gave a microscopic nod. He had done his part. He had kept the books open. He had ensured the guests arrived. Now he was just waiting for the executioner. In the center of the dance floor, Brittany was putting on a show. She was already drunk, her laughter shrill and piercing over the string quartet. She was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown, and on her left hand she flashed a ring that caught the light with a blinding yellow fire. "Look at it," she screamed, grabbing the arm of her high school rival. "It is a canary diamond, 5 carats. Dion surprised me with it this morning. He said a Kensington queen deserves a crown on her finger." I leaned against the railing. Dion had not bought that ring. I knew exactly where it came from. The forensic accountants had flagged a $200,000 withdrawal from the employee pension fund yesterday. Brittany was wearing the retirement savings of the hotel maids and janitors on her finger. She climbed onto a velvet chair, raising her glass for a toast. The room went quiet. To the Kensingtons, Brittany slurred, swaying slightly. "They tried to bury us. My jealous sister tried to ruin my big day. But look at us. We are still standing. We are richer than ever. And we are not going anywhere." The crowd cheered politely, unaware that they were applauding a crime scene. Brittany laughed, drinking deeply from her glass. She looked triumphant. She looked untouchable. I checked my own watch. It was exactly 8 o'clock. "Enjoy the champagne, Brittany," I whispered to the empty air. "Because the hangover is going to last a lifetime." At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the far end of the ballroom did not open for a guest. They were thrown open with a force that shook the walls. The music stopped. The laughter died. And the real party began. The double doors did not just open. They were thrown wide with a force that rattled the antique sconces on the walls. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. The cello let out a dying screech that echoed through the sudden silence of the ballroom. 200 heads turned in unison. The laughter died instantly. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased. Standing in the doorway was not a late-arriving guest. It was Sheriff Miller, flanked by 4 uniformed deputies. Behind them marched a dozen men in dark navy windbreakers. On their backs, in stark white block letters, were the words, "Asset Recovery Team." The contrast was brutal. On one side was the glitter of diamonds and the flow of champagne. On the other was the cold, hard reality of the law. My father, Richard, was the first to react. He set his jaw and marched across the dance floor, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. He looked like a general trying to defend a fortress that had already fallen. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard bellowed, his voice booming in the quiet room. "This is a private event. You have no jurisdiction here, Miller. Get your men out of my hotel immediately before I call the commissioner." Sheriff Miller did not blink. He was a man who had been elected to enforce the law, not to coddle bankrupt socialites. He stepped forward, meeting my father in the center of the room. "This is not your hotel anymore, Mr. Kensington," Miller said, his voice calm, but projecting clearly to the stunned crowd. "And this is not a social call. I am executing a writ of possession and immediate asset seizure authorized by the state Supreme Court." Richard tried to grab the papers from the sheriff represent's hand, but a deputy stepped in, blocking him with a firm shove. Richard stumbled back, nearly tripping over the train of a guest's gown. The humiliation was physical. The great Richard Kensington pushed aside like a common nuisance. "You are making a mistake," Richard sputtered, trying to regain his balance. "My lawyers obtained a stay of execution. Judge Thorne signed it yesterday. You cannot touch this property." "That stay was vacated an hour ago," Miller replied, holding up the new warrant. "The court found evidence of dissipation of assets. You were throwing a $200,000 party with money that belongs to your creditors. That is a felony, Richard. Now stand aside, or I will have you arrested for obstruction of justice." The guests began to whisper. The sound started as a low hum and quickly grew into a buzzing hive of gossip. I could see the senator represent's wife pulling her husband toward the exit. The board members were checking their phones, avoiding eye contact. The illusion of the Kensington power was shattering in real time. The men in the windbreakers did not wait for permission. They swarmed into the room, carrying rolls of yellow tape and barcode scanners. They moved with the efficiency of locusts. One team headed for the bar, another headed for the tech booth. Brittany stood frozen on her velvet chair, the champagne glass tilting dangerously in her hand. She looked from her defeated father to the police officers swarming her party. "Daddy," she whined, her voice piercing the tense atmosphere. "Make them stop. They are ruining my vibe." I leaned over the balcony railing, looking down at the chaos I had orchestrated. "It is not a vibe, Brittany," I said softly, knowing she could not hear me. "It is a raid, and you are the main attraction." I descended the grand marble staircase slowly. The sound of my heels was lost in the commotion, but my presence was felt immediately. The crowd parted for me, not out of respect, but out of shock. They were looking at the woman who had just called in a SWAT team on her own birthday party. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I did not look at my parents, who were currently shouting at the sheriff near the buffet. I looked at the lead asset recovery agent, a man named Davis. "Start with the art," I commanded, my voice carrying over the whimpers of the guests. "The Matisse in the foyer, the Ming vases in the hallway, and tag the chandeliers. Nothing leaves this building without a barcode." The guests watched in horror as men in windbreakers began slapping neon orange seizure stickers onto the priceless heirlooms. A sticker on the gold frame of a portrait, a sticker on the base of a crystal statue, a sticker on the grand piano. It was a visual desecration of the Kensington legacy. The room transformed from a gala into a crime scene in seconds. Brittany was cornered near the DJ booth. She was clutching a Himalayan Birkin bag to her chest like a shield. An agent was trying to speak to her, but she was screaming. "Get away from me!" she shrieked, kicking out at him with her stiletto. "This is my personal property. You cannot touch this. It is a limited edition. It is worth more than your life." I walked over to her. The crowd formed a circle around us, holding their breath. This was the main event. The sisters at war. "Hand it over, Brittany," I said, extending my hand. She looked at me with wild mascara-stained eyes. "You are jealous. That is what this is. You are jealous because I have taste and you have a calculator. This is my bag, Audrey. I bought it." I took a step closer. "No, Brittany. You did not buy it. The Kensington Hotel Group bought it. I reviewed the transaction logs this morning. Transaction ID 4492 at the Hermes Boutique on Madison Avenue. Time stamped yesterday at 10:14 in the morning. Charged to the corporate procurement card under the label Office Supplies." I gestured to the bag. "Last time I checked, a $25,000 crocodile skin handbag does not qualify as office supplies. That bag was purchased with stolen funds during a spending freeze. It is now evidence in a fraud investigation." Brittany clutched the handle tighter, her knuckles turning white. "I will not give it to you." I nodded to Davis. He stepped forward. He did not use force. He simply held up a pair of handcuffs. "You can hand over the bag, Ms. Kensington," Davis said calmly, "or you can be charged with resisting a federal asset seizure. The choice is yours." Brittany looked at the handcuffs. Then she looked at the sea of faces watching her. Her friends, her rivals, the press. They were all recording. With a sob of pure defeat, she threw the bag at me. I caught it by the handle. It was heavy, heavy with greed. "Thank you," I said, handing it to Davis. "Tag it and bag it. And be careful with the leather. We need it in pristine condition for the auction." I turned back to my sister, who was now crying into her hands. "And Brittany," I said, cold and final, "you might want to check your pockets. If you have any jewelry bought this year, put it on the table now. If I find it later, I will have you strip searched at the precinct." She froze. Slowly trembling, she reached for her diamond earrings. The party was over. The liquidation had begun. The chaos in the ballroom reached a fever pitch as the asset recovery team moved toward the grand piano. My father Richard stood in their path, his face a mask of purple rage. He looked at the sheriff, then at the guests who were whispering behind their hands, and finally at me. He realized he had lost the physical battle. The law was stronger than his bluster, so he resorted to the only weapon he had left: his body. Richard gasped loudly, a sound that was meant to carry to the back of the room. He clutched his chest with his left hand, crumpling the silk lapel of his tuxedo. His eyes rolled back theatrically. "My heart," he choked out. "I cannot breathe." He hit the floor with a heavy thud. It was a well-rehearsed fall, breaking his descent with his shoulder before letting his head settle on the carpet. A crystal glass shattered nearby, adding a dramatic punctuation mark to his performance. Patricia screamed. It was a blood-curdling sound. She threw herself onto the floor beside him, cradling his head. "You killed him!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Are you happy now, Audrey? You stressed him to death. He is having a heart attack. Someone call an ambulance." The room erupted in panic. The sheriff signaled his men to stop. The agents froze, barcode scanners in hand. A hush fell over the crowd as the guests realized the night might end in a fatality. Sheriff Miller looked at me, his face pale. "Ms. Kensington, we need to pause the operation. We have a medical emergency. I need to clear the room for the paramedics." I did not move. I did not look concerned. I walked slowly toward the body of my father. I stood directly over him, looking down at his face. His eyes were squeezed shut, but I could see the rapid movement of his pupils beneath the lids. He was checking the room. "Do not stop the operation, Sheriff," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "And do not clear the room." Patricia looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "How can you be so cold? Your father is dying right in front of you." "He is not dying, Mother," I said, taking out my phone. I dialed 911 calmly. "He is negotiating." I spoke into the phone. "Yes, I need an ambulance at the Kensington Hotel. Possible panic attack. The patient is conscious breathing and has a history of psychosomatic episodes used to avoid consequences. No lights and sirens necessary." I hung up and looked at the sheriff. "Keep tagging Miller." "But Ms. Kensington," the sheriff stammered. "If he is really sick—" "He is not sick," I interrupted. "He did this when I was 10 years old because he did not want to go to a parent-teacher conference. He did it when the tax auditors came in '98, and he did it at my college graduation to make sure the attention was on him instead of my diploma. It is the Kensington heart attack. It is a tactical maneuver, not a medical one." I crouched down next to Richard. I leaned close to his ear, close enough to smell the brandy on his breath. "You can get up now, Richard. The paramedics are coming, and they are going to hook you up to an EKG. When the machine shows a normal rhythm, everyone in this room will know you are faking. You have about 30 seconds to have a miraculous recovery, or you can ride the stretcher all the way to the shame of a clean bill of health." Richard represents eyelids fluttered. The groaning stopped. I stood up and turned to the agents. "You heard me. Continue the inventory. If he is still on this floor when you get to the rug, just roll him over. The rug is an antique Persian, and it is going to auction too." Richard miraculously recovered from his heart attack the moment the rug under him was threatened with a barcode scanner. He stood up, dusting off his tuxedo, his face a mask of humiliation. Patricia, realizing the medical sympathy card had failed, turned her frantic energy toward the only person left who she thought she could control. "Dion," she hissed, grabbing his arm with a grip that looked painful. "Do something. You are the CFO. Tell these barbarians that our assets are protected. Tell them about the offshore holdings. Use your words, Dion." Dion looked at her. For 5 years he had jumped every time she snapped her fingers. He had cooked the books to fund her shopping sprees. He had swallowed his pride when they made racist jokes at dinner. He looked at Brittany, who was weeping over her confiscated handbag, not shedding a single tear for the husband she had lied to about a pregnancy. He gently peeled. Patricia represents hand off his arm. "You are right, Patricia," Dion said, his voice strangely calm. "It is time I used my words." He walked past her. He did not go to the sheriff. He walked straight to the small stage where the band had abandoned their instruments. He stepped up to the microphone stand. The feedback whined a high-pitched screech that made everyone in the room cover their ears. The room fell silent again. The guests watched. The police watched. Audrey watched from the foot of the stairs, her face unreadable. Dion tapped the microphone. "My name is Dion Grant. he said, his voice echoing through the ruined party. For the last 5 years, I have served as the chief financial officer for the Kensington Hotel Group. I have been the man responsible for balancing the accounts and ensuring the financial health of this family. Richard stepped forward, looking relieved. See, he shouted, my CFO will clear this up. Listen to him, Miller. Dion looked down at Richard. There was no love in his eyes anymore. Only pity. I am standing here tonight to announce my immediate resignation, Dion continued. As of this moment, I am no longer an employee of the Kensington Group, and I am no longer a silent partner in their crimes. Richard Represent's smile vanished. What are you saying? Dion reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo. He did not pull out a speech. He pulled out a thick, heavy flash drive. I am also surrendering myself to the authorities, Dion announced, looking directly at Sheriff Miller. On this drive is the complete, unredacted financial history of the Kensington estate. It contains the real profit and loss statements, not the ones we sent to the IRS. It details the shell companies used to launder money. It tracks the misappropriation of employee pension funds to pay for luxury vehicles and vacations. And it proves that Richard Kensington has been maintaining a double set of books since 1998. Patricia let out a strangled cry. You traitor! We made you! You did not make me, Dion replied, his voice gaining strength. You owned me. But the lease is up. He stepped off the stage and walked toward the sheriff. He held out the drive. I am ready to make a full statement, Sheriff. And I am willing to testify in exchange for immunity regarding the falsified tax returns I was coerced into signing. Richard lunged. He moved with a speed born of pure panic. He tried to tackle Dion to grab the drive to destroy the evidence, but he never made it. 2 deputies intercepted him, grabbing his arms and slamming him against the wall. Dion did not flinch. He handed the drive to Sheriff Miller. Then he looked at Audrey. He gave her a small, tired nod. It was done. The house of cards had not just fallen. It had been incinerated from the inside. The ballroom emptied with the speed of a collapsing star. There is a specific sound that socialites make when they are fleeing a crime scene. It is the clatter of expensive heels on marble, mixed with the rustle of silk, and the desperate hushed whispers of damage control. The mayor had vanished through the kitchen exit before Dion even finished his sentence. The senator and his wife were sprinting toward the valet stand, covering their faces with dinner napkins to avoid the press cameras that were now flashing through the glass doors. Richard Kensington forgot his heart condition instantly. The moment the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists, he found a surge of adrenaline that would have impressed a man half his age. He thrashed against the deputies, spitting saliva as he screamed at the man he used to call son. You ungrateful mongrel, Richard roared, his face twisted into a demonic mask. I picked you out of the gutter. I gave you a suit. I let you sit at my table. And this is how you repay me. By handing my books to the feds. I will kill you, Dion. I will spend every dime I have left to destroy you. Dion did not even turn around. He stood calmly by Sheriff Miller, answering questions in a low, steady voice while his father foamed at the mouth 10 feet away. Patricia was spinning in circles in the center of the dance floor. She looked like a top that was losing momentum. She grabbed a passing waiter by the lapels, shaking him violently. Where are they going? She shrieked, pointing at the retreating guests. Tell them to come back. The cake is coming out. We have gift bags. This is all a misunderstanding. It is a prank. Tell them it is immersive theater. The waiter, terrified, pulled away and ran, leaving Patricia alone with her delusions. She turned her fury on Brittany. Fix this, Patricia screamed at her daughter. Go cry on live stream. Tell them Dion is mentally unstable. Tell them he beats you. Make something up. We need a narrative shift right now. But Brittany was not listening. She was staring at Dion. She marched over to him, her wedding dress trailing through a puddle of spilled champagne. She looked at the handcuffs on her father, then at her husband. You ruined my party, she said, her voice trembling with narcissistic rage. You ruined my 30th birthday. I do not care about the taxes, Dion. I care that the mayor just saw my father get arrested. How am I supposed to show my face at the club tomorrow? Dion finally looked at her. He looked at the woman he had tried to please for 5 years. He looked at her flat stomach, where the imaginary air was supposed to be. "You will not be going to the club," Brittany Dion said quietly. "The membership fees were paid by the shell company I just exposed. Your membership is revoked. Just like your credit cards. Just like your marriage." Brittany raised her hand to slap him. It was a reflex born of entitlement. But Dion caught her wrist in mid-air. He did not squeeze, he just held it firm, preventing the blow. "No more," he said, dropping her hand. "I am done being your punching bag." He turned to the sheriff. "Take me to the station. I want to get this over with." As they led Dion away and dragged a screaming Richard toward the exit, the room felt vast and empty. The asset recovery team continued their work, indifferent to the family drama. They were peeling the gold leaf off the reality of the Kensingtons. I stood by the champagne tower watching the bubbles go flat. The family was not just broken, they were atomized. They were screaming at each other, blaming everyone but themselves while strangers tagged their furniture. It was the most honest moment they had ever shared. The facade was gone, and underneath was nothing but rot. The room was nearly silent now, save for the rhythmic ripping of packing tape. The music was gone. The guests were gone. The illusion was gone. Only the debt remained. I walked across the dance floor toward my sister. Brittany stood alone near the ruins of the champagne tower. Her mascara was running in dark rivulets down her cheeks, staining the white satin of her gown. She looked like a broken doll left out in the rain. She saw me coming and instinctively clutched her throat, covering the diamond choker that glittered under the harsh work lights the police had set up. "Go away, Audrey," she sobbed. "You have taken everything. You took my car. You took my husband. You took my dignity. Leave me alone." I stopped 2 feet in front of her. I did not feel pity. I felt the cold precision of an accountant balancing a ledger. "I am not done, Brittany," I said, holding out my hand, palm up. "The necklace. And the matching bracelet. And the solitaire studs." Brittany recoiled, pressing her back against the wet tablecloth. "No. You cannot take these. Daddy gave them to me for my 25th birthday. They are sentimental." I took a step closer, invading her personal space. "They are not sentimental, Brittany. They are stolen." I checked the inventory list against the purchase orders. That Harry Winston set was bought in 2018. It was paid for using the Capital Improvement Fund, meant to fix the elevators in the West Wing. Every time you wore those diamonds around your neck, you were wearing the safety of our guests. She shook her head violently, her blonde curls bouncing. "I did not know. I thought he used his own money." "Please, Audrey. It is all I have left. I have no money. I have no credit. If I sell these, I can at least rent an apartment." "That is exactly why I am taking them," I replied, my voice flat. "You are not going to profit from crime. Now take them off. Or I will have the female officer over there do it for you. And she will not be as gentle as I am." Brittany looked at the officer, who was watching us with crossed arms. She let out a low, keen, a sound of pure misery. Her trembling fingers reached up to the clasp at the back of her neck. It took her 3 tries to undo the latch. The necklace slid into her hand, heavy and cold. She held it for 1 second longer, a final goodbye to the life she thought she deserved. Then she dropped it into my palm. Next came the bracelet, then the earrings. I handed the jewelry to Davis, who dropped them into a plastic evidence bag. The sound of the diamonds hitting the bottom of the bag was the final period at the end of the Kensington sentence. Brittany stood there shivering. She looked down at her dress, the extravagant white gown she had ordered to outshine every bride in the city. She began to unzip the side. "Do you want the dress too?" she whispered brokenly. "Do you want me to walk out of here naked? Is that what will finally make you happy?" I looked her up and down. I looked at the uneven stitching on the hem. I looked at the synthetic blend of the fabric. "Keep it," I said, turning my back on her. She blinked, confused. "What?" I walked away, my heels clicking on the marble. "You can keep the dress, Brittany. It is a knockoff. I checked the receipt for that, too." Patricia charged the real Vera Wang to the company, but she returned it and bought you a replica so she could pocket the difference. It has no resale value, and quite frankly, I do not deal in cheap goods. I left her standing there in her worthless gown, surrounded by the empty shell of her life. The liquidation was complete. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. The sound cut through Richard's rambling threats like a guillotine blade. The sheriff held up the warrant that had been printed only 30 minutes ago based on the gigabytes of data Dion had just handed over. He did not whisper. He read the charges with the flat, projected voice of a man who had waited years to take down the biggest bully in the county. Richard Kensington, you are under arrest for 18 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, 12 counts of aggravated tax evasion in the first degree, and 1 count of grand larceny regarding the misappropriation of employee pension funds. Richard stopped thrashing. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and old. The fight went out of him not because he was sorry, but because he knew the math. These were not civil charges. These were federal crimes. This is a mistake. Richard stammered, his voice barely audible. My accountant. It was Dion. He set me up. I did not know. I am a victim here. Sheriff Miller shook his head. Save it for the judge, Richard. We have your signature on the authorization forms. We have the emails where you explicitly told Dion to hide the assets in the Cayman Islands. You are not a victim. You are the architect. Who are the... Miller nodded to his deputies. Get him out of here. They grabbed Richard by the elbows. He did not walk with dignity. He stumbled, his expensive Italian loafers dragging on the carpet. As they pushed him toward the revolving doors, he turned his head back, looking for someone to save him. He looked at Patricia. He looked at Brittany. He even looked at me. Audrey, he screamed, a desperate primal sound. Fix this. I am your father. You cannot let them take me to jail. I am Richard Kensington. I watched him go. I did not blink. You were Richard Kensington, I thought. Now you are just inmate number 492. The revolving doors spun. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers washed over the lobby glass, illuminating his terrified face one last time. Then he was gone, shoved into the back of a squad car. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The asset recovery team finished their work. They placed a final large orange sticker on the main double doors of the ballroom. Sealed by order of the state of New York. Davis approached me. We are done here, Ms. Kensington. The building is secured. We will change the locks in the morning. I nodded. Thank you, Davis. The agents filed out, leaving only 3 people in the cavernous, ruined room. Me, my mother, and my sister. Patricia stood near the buffet table. She was trembling so hard her emerald sequins shimmered like a disco ball. She looked at the empty doorway where her husband had vanished. Then she looked around at the orange tags that covered every single object she had built her identity on. She smoothed her dress, trying to summon a ghost of her former arrogance. It is fine, Patricia whispered, her voice shaking. It is just a misunderstanding. I will call Gavin Thorne. We will have Daddy out on bail by breakfast. We will go to the Hamptons' house until this blows over. I looked at her from the stairs. The Hamptons' house was seized an hour ago, Mother, I said. And there is no bail for flight risks with offshore accounts. Brittany sat on the floor in her cheap replica wedding dress, hugging her knees. She did not look up. She just stared at the spot where the champagne tower used to be. We are homeless, Brittany said softly. I walked to the exit. I paused at the door, looking back at them. 2 women standing in the wreckage of a party that never really started, surrounded by wealth that was never really theirs. You are not homeless, I said. You have the clothes on your backs, which is more than you left me with 10 years ago. I pushed open the doors and walked out into the cool night air. Behind me, I left them alone in the dark, truest silence they had ever known. The Federal Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of New York was a room designed to strip away dignity. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency, and the air smelled of floor wax and defeat. I sat at the plaintiff table next to my general counsel, James. On the other side of the aisle sat my mother, Patricia, and my sister, Brittany. They looked less like socialites and more like refugees. Patricia was wearing a frantic expression and a suit that was clearly 3 seasons old. Brittany stared at the table, her eyes vacant. Richard was noticeably absent. He was currently being processed at the Metropolitan Detention Center. The Honorable Judge Sterling adjusted his glasses and looked down at the mountain of motions on his bench. He was a man who had seen every type of financial ruin, but even he looked weary of the Kensington circus. "We are here to determine the status of the Theodore Kensington Revocable Trust," the judge announced, his voice dry. "The estate is currently in receivership. However, there is a dispute regarding the beneficiary status of Miss Audrey Kensington." Patricia shot up from her chair before her lawyer Gavin Thorne could stop her. She was clutching a plastic evidence bag containing the linen paper I had signed at the restaurant. The ink was barely dry, but to her it was a holy scripture. "There is no dispute." "Your Honor," Patricia shrilled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is not a beneficiary. She is nothing. She signed this document voluntarily. She waived all rights to the Kensington name and assets." Thorne tugged at her sleeve, whispering furiously, but she shook him off. She was desperate. She believed with every fiber of her being that the trust was the lifeboat that would save them. She thought it contained millions of dollars hidden from the IRS. She thought that if she could just keep me away from it, she and Brittany could flee to a non-extradition country and live like queens. "She is trying to steal our inheritance," Patricia continued, her voice rising to a desperate pitch. "She knows the trust is the only thing left. She is a vulture, Your Honor. She has already taken the hotel. She took the house. Now she wants the legacy. You cannot let her have it." I leaned over to James. I kept my face impassive, but my eyes were laughing. "Object," I whispered. "Make it look real." James stood up. "Your Honor, my client contends that the waiver was signed under duress. She was threatened with total familial alienation." "Duress." Patricia laughed, a manic sound that echoed off the wood paneling. "We bought her dinner. She signed it because she is arrogant. She thought she was too good for our money. Well, she was right. She is too good for it. And now she cannot have a cent." She turned to the judge, thrusting the bag toward him. "Look at it. Clause 7. The undersigned irrevocably waives all beneficiary rights. It is ironclad. She is out. The trust belongs to the remaining family members. That means me and Brittany." Judge Sterling took the bag. He read the document slowly. The silence in the room was heavy. Patricia held her breath. She looked at me with a smirk of pure malice. She thought she had checkmated me. She thought she was blocking me from the treasure chest. She had no idea she was locking herself inside the bomb shelter with a live grenade. The judge looked up. "The document appears to be in order. The signature is verified. The intent is clear." He banged his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. "The court rules that the waiver stands. Audrey Kensington is hereby removed as a beneficiary of the Theodore Kensington Revocable Trust. The entirety of the trust assets and liabilities shall pass to the remaining heirs, Patricia and Brittany Kensington." Patricia let out a squeal of victory. She hugged an unresponsive Brittany. "We won," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. "We beat her." I slowly began to pack my briefcase. I looked across the aisle at my mother, who was celebrating the acquisition of a $40 million tax debt. "Congratulations, Mother," I said softly. "You fought for it. You won it. Now you have to pay for it." Judge Sterling cleared his throat. "Now that ownership is established, we will proceed to the reading of the trust assets." I sat back down. This was the moment. The curtain was about to fall. James stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with the nonchalance of a man ordering lunch. He looked at Patricia, who was practically vibrating with triumph, and then he turned to Judge Sterling. "Your Honor," James said, his voice smooth and carrying to the back of the room. "After consulting with my client, we have decided not to pursue an appeal. Ms. Kensington accepts the court represents ruling. She acknowledges that the document she signed at dinner is valid. She formally and irrevocably waives any claim to the Theodore Kensington Trust. She wants her mother and sister to have it all, every single penny." Patricia let out a loud gasp of relief. She turned to Brittany, clutching her daughter represents hand. "Did you hear that, Brittany?" She gave up. "We won. It is ours. The millions are ours." Brittany looked up, a spark of life returning to her dull eyes. "We can move to Paris," she whispered. "We can buy a chateau. We can start over." I sat perfectly still. I watched them build castles in the air. It was almost cruel what was about to happen. Almost. But then I remembered the identity theft. I remembered the tow trucks. I remembered the years of being called a failure. And I felt nothing but a cold, satisfied resolve. Judge Sterling adjusted his spectacles. He opened the thick leather-bound folder that sat on his bench. He looked at the first page, then flipped to the second. His bushy eyebrows knitted together in confusion. He looked over the rim of his glasses at Patricia. "Mrs. Kensington, since you are now the sole confirmed beneficiaries, the court must execute the immediate transfer of the trust represents holdings to you and your daughter." "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said, beaming. "Transfer it immediately. We are ready to accept our legacy." The judge cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable. "Very well. According to the audit conducted by the IRS and verified by the court trustee, the Theodore Kensington Revocable Trust contains 0 liquid assets." Patricia represents Smile faltered. "Excuse me." However, the judge continued, his voice growing stern. "The trust does hold a significant liability, specifically a 30-year-old deferred tax lien on the original Kensington land grants, combined with failed leveraged buyout debts from 1992. He turned a page. The paper rustled loudly in the silent courtroom. "The total outstanding debt, including compounded interest and federal penalties, is $42 million. Since you fought to enforce the waiver, Ms. Audrey Kensington is absolved of this liability. As the sole beneficiaries, you and Ms. Brittany Kensington are now personally responsible for the full amount. The IRS has already issued a levy against any future earnings to satisfy this debt." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Patricia Represent's face went from flushed to a terrifying shade of gray. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock, but no sound came out. Brittany let out a low keen. "$42 million, she whispered. "Debt. It is debt." I stood up. I picked up my briefcase. I walked over to the defense table and looked down at my mother. She was frozen in shock, her brain unable to process the magnitude of her mistake. "I tried to tell you, Mother," I said softly. "I told you that you did not want me in that will. But you insisted. You called me greedy. You said I wanted to steal your fortune." I leaned in closer. "You were right about one thing. It is a legacy. And now it is all yours. Enjoy the chateau." I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. I did not turn around. I knew it was Patricia. And I knew that this time she was not faking it. The weight of $42 million is enough to crush anyone, even a Kensington. The gavel banged again, attempting to restore order to a room that had just seen a dynasty evaporate into red ink. Judge Sterling looked over his spectacles at Brittany, who was clutching the edge of the defense table, as if it were the rail of a sinking ship. "Order in the court," the judge commanded. "Ms. Kensington, please sit down. We need to finalize the transfer of liability." Brittany did not sit. She stared at the judge with wild, uncomprehending eyes. "Liability," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What do you mean, liability? Grandfather was rich. He built the skyline. There has to be money. There has to be something other than debt." The judge sighed, flipping a page in the heavy ledger. "Theodore Kensington was indeed a wealthy man at one point," the judge explained. "But in 1992 he engaged in a series of high-risk derivatives, trading to save the hotel chain from bankruptcy. He hid the losses in this trust hoping the market would recover. It never did. The trust is technically a shell company, and since it has no income, the IRS has been compounding the interest on the unpaid taxes for 3 decades. He looked directly at Brittany. "Usually this debt would be divided among all living heirs. It would be a heavy burden, but perhaps manageable if split 3 ways. However, your mother successfully argued that Audrey Kensington has no legal standing in this trust. She insisted that Audrey be removed completely." Patricia, who was slumped in her chair, let out a low moan. She realized what she had done. By fighting to keep the whole pie, she had forced her favorite daughter to eat the poison alone. Therefore, the judge continued hammering the final nail into the coffin. You, Ms. Brittany Kensington, are the sole remaining beneficiary. The IRS is not interested in your personal inability to pay. They will garnish your wages. They will seize any future assets you acquire, and this debt is not dischargeable in bankruptcy because it involves tax fraud. Brittany turned to me. Her face was a mask of pure terror. You knew, she screamed. You knew what was in the safe. That is why you signed the paper at dinner. You were not giving up. You were running away. I stood calmly by my table, smoothing out my skirt. I did not run, Brittany. I said, my voice cool and clear. I sidestepped. I tried to warn you. I told you that you did not want what was in that safe. But you and Mother were so obsessed with cutting me out, so obsessed with your own greed, that you did not stop to ask why I was so willing to walk away. I picked up the copy of the waiver that lay on the table. The paper Patricia had waved around like a trophy just minutes ago. You wanted to be the sole heir, I said. You wanted the Kensington legacy all to yourself. Well, congratulations. You are now the sole owner of the Kensington mistake. Brittany looked at her mother. Do something, Mom, she begged. Tell him we do not want it. Tell him to give it back to Audrey. Patricia shook her head slowly. She looked old, defeated. We cannot, she whispered. The judge already ruled. The waiver is irrevocable. We made sure of that. I walked toward the aisle. One more thing, Brittany, I added, pausing by the gate. Since you are now responsible for the $40 million, you might want to look for a job. I hear the hotel is hiring maids. Minimum wage isn't not much, but at least it is a start. I walked out of the courtroom. Behind me, I heard Brittany sobbing uncontrollably, a sound of pure desolation. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped into the hallway. For the first time in my life, I felt light. The weight of the Kensington name was finally gone. It belonged to them now, and it was going to bury them. I stood outside the heavy oak doors of Courtroom 3, listening to the aftermath of a nuclear detonation. Inside, the screaming had stopped, replaced by a frantic commotion. I turned and looked through the rectangular glass window. This was the final act, and I wanted to see the curtain call. Brittany was on the floor. It was not the graceful swoon of a Victorian maiden. It was the hard, uncoordinated collapse of a woman whose nervous system had simply shut down. Her legs were twisted beneath her, and her head rested on the dirty linoleum. The bailiffs were moving the tables aside, calling for a medic, but for once the drama was real. The crushing weight of $42 million had physically flattened her. Patricia was on her knees beside her daughter. She was not checking Brittany represents pulse. She was shaking her. Get up, Brittany! My mother shrieked, her voice raw with panic. You have to get up. We have to call Gavin. We have to fix this. Do not lie there like a coward. Judge Sterling banged his gavel, but he looked bored. He had seen debtors collapse before. Bailiff, get her some water, the judge ordered, and Mrs. Kensington stepped back. Your daughter is not going anywhere. In fact, she is not going anywhere for a very long time. Patricia looked up at the bench, tears streaming down her face. She is sick, Your Honor. She needs a private doctor. We need to go home. There is no home, Mrs. Kensington, the judge said, cold and efficient. And as of this moment, your daughter is a flight risk. The judge turned to the clerk. Issue an immediate surrender order for Brittany Kensington, represents passport. Notify the State Department. She is barred from international travel until a repayment plan is established with the IRS. Furthermore, place her name on the no-fly list. We cannot have her running to the Caymans to join her father. Patricia gasped. You cannot trap her here. She is a citizen. She is a debtor, the judge corrected. And since she has no liquidity to make the initial good faith payment, I am ordering court-mandated employment. Employment, Patricia whispered, as if the word were a curse. Yes. Community service to begin with. The city sanitation department is looking for workers to clean graffiti in the subway system. It pays minimum wage, which will be garnished 100% by the federal government. It will take her approximately 4,000 years to pay off the debt at that rate, but she can start Monday at 6 in the morning. Patricia looked down at her unconscious daughter. She looked at the soft, manicured hands that had never lifted anything heavier than a credit card. She imagined those hands scrubbing walls in a subway station. Then her eyes fell on the table where the waiver still lay. The document I had signed. The document she had fought for. The paper she had waved in my face like a victory flag. She reached out and touched it. Her hand trembled. She realized with a sick, jolting clarity that she was the architect of this hell. She had forced me out. She had insisted on sole ownership. She had shielded her favorite child from me only to push her directly into the path of the firing squad. "I did this," Patricia whispered. Her voice was hollow. "I did this." Brittany groaned, stirring on the floor. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked at the fluorescent lights, then at her mother represent's devastated face. "Mom," Brittany croaked, dry and weak. "Tell me it was a dream. Tell me I am still rich." Patricia sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I am sorry," she wept. "I am so sorry, baby." I turned away from the glass. The image of the two of them broken on the floor of a government building was burned into my memory. It was not a happy ending. It was justice. Cold, mathematical, and absolute. I adjusted my coat and walked down the hallway. I had a hotel to run, and for the first time in 10 years, the air in New York City tasted sweet. The heavy metal doors of the district attorney office swung open with a dull thud. Dion Grant stepped out onto the sidewalk, blinking against the harsh afternoon sunlight. He adjusted his collar. He was no longer wearing the bespoke Italian suit that Patricia had forced him to wear for appearances. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans he had bought an hour ago. He looked like a man who had just walked out of a burning building without looking back. I was waiting for him by the curb, leaning against the black sedan. I was not there to gloat. I was there to close the final ledger entry. Dion stopped when he saw me. He did not look fearful anymore. The anxious tick in his jaw was gone. "It is done," Dion said, his voice steady. The DA accepted the deal. Full immunity in exchange for testimony. I gave them everything, Audrey. The Cayman accounts, the shell corporations, the bribes paid to the zoning board. Richard is going away for 20 years. Minimum. I nodded. And the debt. He let out a short, dry laugh. Not my problem anymore. I was an employee acting under duress. The liability stays with the estate, or rather with Brittany. I looked at his hands. They were empty. No wedding ring. The band of pale skin where the gold used to sit was the only evidence that he had ever been a Kensington. And the divorce, I asked. "Filed this morning," Dion replied. "On the grounds of fraud." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me. It was a copy of a medical report seized during the raid. "You were right," he said softly, looking at the traffic moving past us. "There was no baby. The medical files confirm she had a hysterectomy 3 years ago in Switzerland. The pregnancy was a lie. The ultrasounds were downloaded from the internet. She was trapping me, Audrey. She knew I wanted a family, and she used that to keep me chained to her desk, cooking her books." I handed the paper back to him. It was a cruel confirmation, but necessary. "I am sorry, Dion," I said. "Don't be," he said, shaking his head. "If she had really been pregnant, I might have stayed. I might have gone down with the ship trying to protect a child that didn't exist. That lie was the only thing holding me back. When you exposed it, you didn't just win. You set me free." He extended his hand. It was steady. "Thank you, Audrey." I took his hand. His grip was firm. It was the handshake of a man who owned his own soul again. "Where will you go?" I asked. Dion smiled. For the first time in 5 years, it was a genuine smile. "I am going to go find a job where the only thing I have to count is legitimate revenue. And maybe I will find a woman who wants a husband, not a financial accomplice." He let go of my hand and turned to walk down the street. He had no luggage. He had no car. He had no millions in the bank. But as I watched him disappear into the crowd of the city, he walked with a lightness that Richard and Patricia would never know again. He was poor, but he was free. And in the Kensington world, that was the ultimate luxury. The crane lowered the massive gold letter K from the facade of the hotel. It swung in the wind for a moment before hitting the pavement with a hollow metallic clang. I stood on the sidewalk across the street watching the deconstruction of an empire. The workmen were already drilling the holes for the new signage. It would not be called the Kensington anymore. It would be the Eleanor. Named after the only woman in this family who ever hugged me without checking for a camera crew first. My grandmother. She died leaving me nothing but a music box and a lesson about patience. She used to tell me that the truth always floats. I think she would have liked seeing her name in lights replacing the son who betrayed her legacy. I turned away from the construction and walked 2 blocks south. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. I stopped in front of Le Monde. This was where it started. This was the restaurant where Patricia had sat me down months ago. This was table 4, where she had slid the waiver across the white tablecloth and told me I was a liability. She had bought me a salad and a glass of tap water and demanded I sign away my birthright. I walked in. The hostess station was manned by the same maitre d' who had sneered at me back then when my credit card was declined during the asset freeze. He looked up ready to tell me they were fully booked. Then, he saw the suit. It was not off the rack. Then, he saw the watch. It was a Patek Philippe. And most importantly, he saw the way I held my head. "Right this way. Ms. Kensington," he stammered, grabbing a menu. I did not correct him. I just walked past him to table 4. It was empty. I sat down in the same chair I had occupied as a victim, but today I sat in it as a victor. The sommelier arrived looking nervous. He knew the rumors. Everyone in New York knew the rumors. "Water for the table?" he asked. "No," I said. "Why?" "I want the 1945 Romani Conti, and leave the bottle." He froze. His eyes widened. "Madame, that is a $12,000 bottle. We usually require a deposit for that vintage." I looked at him. I did not blink. "Open it." I drank the wine slowly. It tasted like earth and history. I ate my dinner in silence, watching the city move outside the window. I watched the people who used to look down on me rushing to catch taxis. I watched the world that used to reject me now bending to make space for me. When the check came, it was presented on a small silver tray. The waiter hovered nearby, expecting me to reach for a purse. Expecting the old Audrey, the one who counted pennies, the one who was afraid. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. I did not reach for a card. I did not reach for cash. I simply turned the receipt over. I wrote a single sentence on the back. "Deduct from monthly commercial rent." I handed it back to the confused waiter. He looked at the writing, then back at me. "I do not understand, madame." "Rent." I stood up and put on my coat. I looked around the dining room. I looked at the chandeliers. I looked at the velvet curtains. "You should check your land records," I said, smiling. "I bought this building this morning. The lease for this restaurant is now held by the Eleanor Group. You are sitting in my dining room." The waiter dropped the tray. It clattered loudly, drawing the attention of the entire room. I walked toward the door. "The meal is on the house," I said over my shoulder. "Because I own the house." I stepped out into the cool night air. The city was loud and chaotic and beautiful. I took a deep breath. It did not smell like revenge anymore. It smelled like freedom. The vulture had finished her meal. Now it was time to fly. The saga of Audrey and the Kensington family serves as a brutal masterclass in the difference between net worth and self-worth. The most profound lesson here is that the truth acts like compound interest. It accumulates silently over time and eventually, the bill always comes due. Richard, Patricia, and Brittany built their entire existence on the sandy foundation of optics. They believed that looking wealthy was the same as being secure. They operated under the delusion that they could treat people, including their own daughter and loyal employee, as disposable liabilities. their downfall teaches us that the most dangerous form of bankruptcy is not financial, but moral. When you mortgage your integrity to buy social status, foreclosure is inevitable. In contrast, Audrey demonstrates that knowledge is the ultimate leverage. She didn't win by screaming the loudest. She won by reading the fine print. She proves that in a world of noise, the person who holds the receipts holds the power. She refused to accept the narrative her family wrote for her. Instead of breaking under the weight of their rejection, she used it to build her own foundation, one made of competence, patience, and undeniable reality. Ultimately, this story reminds us that you have the right to audit your life. You have the right to liquidate toxic relationships and cut out anyone who views you as an expense rather than an asset. True freedom isn't just about buying the building, it's about owning your narrative. If you enjoyed seeing the vulture take back what was hers, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications for more stories where justice is served cold. Which character's ending satisfied you the most? Let me know in the comments below.